Welcome. Today we'll explain NIST 800-171 requirement 3.1.11, which mandates automatic termination of user sessions, and how contractors can implement this for CMMC Level 2. 3.1.11, the practice requirement and assessment objectives. The requirement itself states to terminate automatically a user session after a defined condition. Assessment Objective A, defined conditions require session termination, and B, sessions auto-terminate upon these conditions. The requirement ensures user sessions are auto-terminated when specific conditions occur, reducing unauthorized access risks. Each organization must decide which conditions should trigger termination. Common examples are inactivity timeouts, when a shift ends, or network interruptions. As contractors, make sure you formally document when that session should terminate. Remember to configure systems uniformly across all devices and educate end users. Any deviations to your procedure must be justified and recorded. Let's look at contractor implementation using Microsoft Government Community Cloud. Microsoft Entra ID helps you set the sign-in session timeouts once you've defined that. Entra Smart Lockout protects against risky logins. The Azure portal is where you configure your session policies. And Defender for Cloud Apps monitors session risk and enforces those policies. Intune sets inactivity timeouts on the endpoints, while Defender for Endpoint detects and responds to session misuse. Recapping the Microsoft GCC tools used to auto-terminate a session, remember to configure sessions durations in Entra ID, Smart Lockout to prevent unwanted access, and manage session policies in Azure and Intune. Again, Intune is for device level settings. And monitor and respond to session misuse with Defender. Key takeaways for terminating automatically a user session. Automatic session termination is essential to protect CUI, and CMMC Level 2 compliance requires documented policies and technical controls. And of course, GCC and the security tools can help support this requirement and overall compliance. Following these requirements protects information and meets the CMMC and NIST standards while utilizing these Microsoft tools. We'll pause here for any questions, and feel free to email me at either address for your questions or comments. Thank you. Welcome. This presentation focuses on meeting CMMC Level 2 requirement 3.1.12, which asks organizations to monitor and control remote access sessions. We'll clarify the requirement and action items needed, along with best practices and available Microsoft security tools. Okay, 3.1.12, monitor and control remote access sessions. A remote access session allows a user to access and control a computer, a system, or an application from a different location. It essentially enables users to interact with IT resources as if they were physically present at the remote location. Keep in mind that this introduces risk and vulnerability to outside attack or access. Point-wise, there are no penalty points on your assessment if remote access is not permitted. So if your policies and procedures and technical configurations do not allow you to access your system remotely, then you are covered for this CMMC Level 2 requirement. That is, as long as you document this properly. Let's look at Assessment Objective A. Are remote access sessions permitted? If they are, let's go to B. We need to, are these permitted types of remote access need to be identified? And C, these permitted types, once they're identified, they also need to be controlled. And D, they need to be monitored. Auditors expect contractors to show how remote access is managed. If remote access isn't allowed, simply state so in your policies. Otherwise, you must document permissions, controls, and monitoring procedures. Here's examples of practice requirement actions for monitoring and controlling remote access sessions. Maintain a list of approved remote access methods. In effect, virtual private network or Microsoft's remote desktop protocol, RDP, are implemented through Azure Bastion. Restrict remote access to authorized users and devices, and require multi-factor authentication, or MFA. And as always, monitor logs for unusual activity or access attempts. To sum this up, good practice includes keeping an up-to-date list of what remote access solutions are allowed and using strong authentication while having controls and monitoring tools in place for all sessions. And of course, we've heard this before, we need documented policies and procedures. If you do allow remote access, define and approve allowable remote access types within your policy. Document who can remotely access those sensitive resources, and review and update remote access permissions regularly. And as always, train staff on secure remote access protocols. In short, you need written policies that identify and control the remote access if allowed, and regularly update your access list. Review and update that list as needed, and train everybody on any rules and secure practices for monitoring and controlling remote access. Let's look at implementing Microsoft GCC along with Entra ID. Entra ID enforces multi-factor authentication and controls user access. Azure Bastion, if allowed, secures and monitors RDP, or Remote Desktop Protocol, and SSH, or Secure Shell, which are both protocols used for remote access. Defender for IoT monitors remote sessions into operational technology or Internet of Things environments. And Azure Sentinel aggregates, detects, and alerts on remote access activities. When using Microsoft 365 with GCC, Entra ID controls user permissions and MFA. Use Azure Bastion for secure monitored control connections, and Defender for IoT and Sentinel for robust monitoring and alerting. Okay, key takeaways. Understand if you even need or permit remote access for your business processes. If not, state this in your documentation. Clearly list approved remote access types and control them. Document monitoring and regularly review activity logs. Leverage Microsoft security tools for compliance. In short, document everything. use the right tools, and regularly review for compliance. Only permit necessary remote access and make sure it's monitored and well controlled. We'll pause here for any questions, and feel free to email me at either address for your questions. Welcome. Today we'll clarify NIST 800-171 requirement 313, which addresses protecting remote access sessions through cryptography. This is a critical level 2 control for defense contractors. 3113, practice requirement and assessment objectives. Employ cryptographic mechanisms to protect the confidentiality of remote access sessions. Assessment objectives, there are two. First, identify what encryption mechanisms are in place for remote access. And second, ensure those mechanisms are actively protecting any remote sessions, such as VPN or remote desktops. Actions for this requirement: use virtual private networks with strong encryption, like transport layer security, TLS. Enforce MFA or multi-factor authentication. Permit remote access only through controlled encrypted channels. And block unencrypted protocols like Telnet or FTP. These are practical steps. Always use encrypted VPNs, require MFA, and only permit remote access through controlled encrypted channels, while blocking unencrypted remote access. These methods both identify and implement the cryptographic protections required. Let's look at procedures a contractor must document. Maintain an up-to-date remote access policy. Document approved cryptographic controls, protocols, and tools. Regularly review and update encryption standards. And of course, train all your users on secure remote access practices. In short, your organization shall formalize a policy naming approved tools, like which VPN or RDP protocols are authorized, and keep this documentation current. Of course, user training is key to maintaining secure practices. As a contractor implementing Microsoft GCC, Entra ID, and Azure Portal for this requirement, remember that Microsoft 365 GCC uses transport layer security and or secure socket layer for remote sessions. These are both cryptographic controls that encrypt data and authenticate a connection when moving data on the internet. Microsoft Entra ID is used to enforce access policies and identify protection. The Azure Portal supports conditional access and encrypted connections, while you audit and enforce cryptographic sessions in your administrative controls. When using Microsoft's GCC, Entra ID, and Azure Portal, you're leveraging built-in compliant encryption for remote access. The Admin Center lets you enforce strong authentication and encryption, and helps you be sure to audit and verify these configurations. And key takeaways. Remote access must always be encrypted. Both identification and implementation are required, and documentation and regular review are essential. Again, the Microsoft GCC platform provides these solutions. To recap, remote access without encryption is a violation for CMMC Level 2. Both identifying and enforcing cryptographic protection are mandatory, and Microsoft's federal cloud services meets these needs effectively. Okay, we'll pause here for any questions or email me at either of these addresses. Thank you. Welcome again. Let's explain requirement 3.1.14, which covers how remote access to systems should be securely routed through managed access control points. This is one of a series of controls regarding remote access. Practice requirement 3.1.14. Route remote access by way of managed access control points. What does that mean? A, identify and implement these points. And B, confirm that all remote access routes through those points. This means that you must control and monitor all entry points into your networks used for remote access, and also confirm that these controls are working. Let's look at example actions to route remote access by way of managed access control points. This one gets a bit more technical. Use firewalls and VPN, or virtual private network concentrators, as access control points. Route remote desktop protocol, or RDP, and secure shell, or SSH, traffic through managed gateways. RDP and SSH are two different ways to access remote systems. RDP is primarily used to remotely control Windows-based machines and provide a graphical interface for managing servers and desktops. In short, monitor activity at all access control points and block direct connections to internal systems. Best practice examples include funneling all remote traffic through company firewalls, through managed VPN endpoints, or secure gateways. Never expose internal systems directly to the internet. Let's look at your organizational procedures that must be defined and documented. Make sure to define and document all access control points and develop a clear policy defining your access gateways. Restrict remote access to only authorized users. And specify who can use your access gateways. And log and monitor access at these points. Regularly review routes and update as systems change. So, ensure all activity is logged and reviewed for suspicious behaviors. Okay, contractor implementation with Microsoft GCC, Azure Bastion, VPN Gateway, and Intune. For routing remote access by managed access points, Azure Bastion secures RDP, or Remote Desktop Protocol, and or SSH or Secure Shell to access to Azure virtual machines by way of a secure browser. In other words, no public internet protocols. Azure VPN, or Virtual Private Network Gateway, uses encrypted remote access routed through a managed gateway. Intune or Intune Suite controls device compliance and remote access permissions. And Microsoft GCC in general applies policies restricting access through managed points. So, though Microsoft's tools might make compliance easier, there are some configurations and actions needed. Azure Bastion handles JetBox access without exposing virtual machines, while the gateway centralizes all remote access, and Intune enforces device and user controls. But all this needs to be configured in your system. Okay, key takeaways. Managed access control points like firewalls and VPN concentrators must handle all remote access. All remote access needs to go through these managed checkpoints, never straight to internal resources. And of course, document, implement, and regularly audit control points. And we'll pause here again for questions or email those to me at jim@cpisys.com. Thank you.